The next research design that I want to tell you about is called ethnography. And we kind of inherited that in the management and similar studies from anthropology. So anthropology was working with ethnography for a very, very long time. And it was used to study the various cultures and so on. And there is also one kind of incredibly famous example from biology. It is Jane Goodall, who basically lived with the gorillas in order to be able to study them. So we are still learning this in the most of the other areas, but they are incredibly powerful. So organizational ethnography became a concept, and it is a very useful research design. And I think that it works very well, particularly when you study the same organization where you work. And for many of you, this is exactly the case. And that's why I told Gerge, for example, previously that this is one of those approaches that can work very well for him. Because the case study was the first in-depth research. So everything before that was kind of very superficial. And then as they started to go deeper with the case studies, they have seen that there is further we could go. There is greater depth that how we can achieve an understanding. And that was the purpose of coming up with a new research design that allows for that kind of depth. And this means that you can see stuff from the inside. So very often it used to be later, a long time ago, an undercover type of study. And this is not very popular today for claimed ethical reasons. So we had, for example, a guy who did undercover ethnography in haute cuisine. He was a chef by training. That's not my PhD student, that's a different guy. He was a chef by training, so he could get a job in haute cuisine restaurants. And he never told them that he's doing the research. And he documented everything and caused very serious problems to those restaurants because he reported physical abuse and all sorts of incredibly inappropriate things that were going on. And then the restaurants were kind of offended that this was happening. In my view, this is not legitimate. If they were not criminals, then they would not have any reason to be offended. But of course, now we have this kind of idea that these things should be all declared in advance and such. So let's see. Today, undercover is not really allowed. So mostly when you need to apply for ethical approval for your study, you will not get it for undercover study. And if you can, then it is still a very good thing. But you are in a kind of very unique position if you are researching the same place where you are working. Because even if you tell them that it is your research, they will not mind having you around. And the whole issue about being undercover was that if you want to observe how things really are, then they should not be paying attention to you. The only good way is if they forget that you are there. And that is exactly what, for example, Jane Goodall was able to achieve. That she spent so much time with those gorillas that they did not look at her anymore as a foreign something. It was okay that she was there. So they could go about their kind of business as normal without changing their behavior because of her. And this is the essence of ethnography, okay? To observe how things really work without being an obstacle to those processes. Obviously, there are different types, particularly here the philosophical approach will be a very important one. If you do a realist or positivist case study, it will mean that you can only collect facts, but more important than that, in a positivist ethnography, you are not allowed to decide on the spot what you are looking at. You need to have it preset. And that's a really huge limitation. I mean, if you are already there, I don't know, let's say that you are studying a tribe like Margaret Mead was doing. You're studying a tribe and you describe in advance that, I don't know, in the evenings, it looks that these guys are, I don't know, dancing around the fire. So I will look at how many people are dancing around the fire and what kind of steps they are making. And then you see, we are watching this dance around the fire, and you see that some people leave and then they come back. I would be very curious where they go, what they do, so on, what it has to do with anything. You could not plan for this because you did not know about it. Yet, if you are doing a positivist ethnography, then you are not allowed to go after them, to record anything that was happening that you did not decide about in advance. So it is like very much nailing down a kind of schedule that is not necessarily useful. If you are conducting an interpretivist ethnography, which is very often called impressionist, it means that it is all about the personal experiences. The difficulty with that is that it is so hard to figure out even the boundary between you and the others. So as it happened with Margaret Mead, for example, she became part of the tribe. She got a new husband there and everything. So it was basically she became one of them, and she wrote the most brilliant studies of these Samoan tribes. But it was only that she kind of let go of her own thing. And there are some other kind of more specific things. For example, the Frankfurt School, as a generic term, but it is mostly Jürgen Habermas type direction. They are focusing on the so-called marginalized voices. So you basically join a group that is a minority group that is official or not, and then you are looking at what sort of impact, how they are impacted by the more kind of generic rule that lives in that kind of area. So I think that anthropologists have done a fantastic job developing ethnography as a research design, and that it is incredibly useful for us, especially in these type of doctoral studies, which is done by people who are doing it part-time, so they work somewhere and they study their own organization. It is one of the things that would be my favorite choice. So very powerful, very in-depth, can preserve all sorts of richness and such. So there is not much on the downside if it is the organization where you are anyway.